Let's just jump right in. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating yet somehow completely forgotten slice of history. You know, when most of us think about the dawn of the automobile, our minds immediately go to those early gasoline engines, right? Sputtering to life somewhere in the late 19th century. But what if I told you the history of self-propelled road vehicles actually goes back way further than that? Like, way further. Today, we are tracing the evolution of steam carriages and revealing how steam-powered cars actually predated gas cars by over a whole century.
I mean, it's a wild thought, right? What if the very first cars didn't run on gas at all, but on boiling water? I am so incredibly thrilled you're here for this one because we're about to go on a chronological journey through an amazing technological what-if reality. We're going to look at the brilliant minds who put steam on the open road, the massive, undeniable successes they had, and the ultimately tragic reasons why their inventions just vanished.
So here's our roadmap for this explainer. Part 1, the first steam pioneers. Part 2, London's steam bus boom. Part 3, Victorian engineering marvels. Part 4, roadblocks and heavy tolls. And finally, Part 5, the internal combustion takeover. Part 1, the first steam pioneers, explosive early prototypes. Okay, let's set the scene. We're traveling all the way back to the late 18th century. Now, during this time, steam power was already revolutionizing factories and mines, but those stationary engines, they were massive. The huge challenge for early pioneers was figuring out how to shrink these giant, incredibly heavy machines down enough so they could actually propel a vehicle down a bumpy dirt road. And honestly, the earliest attempts were wildly ambitious. Back in 1769, a French inventor named Nicolas Joseph Cugnot built the Fardier à vapeur. This thing was essentially a massive, steam-powered artillery tractor built for the military. It actually ran, but it was incredibly unstable and topped out at a blistering 4 kilometers per hour. Then, in 1801, British engineer Richard Trevithick built his famous Puffing Devil, which actually managed to carry passengers up a hill. And just a few years later, in 1805, an American inventor, Oliver Evans, built the Orycdunter Amphibolos in Philadelphia. And get this, it was the world's first amphibious vehicle. But you know, these early days were full of trial, error, and some genuinely spectacular mishaps. Take Trevithick's Puffing Devil from 1801. It's a great story. After a completely successful test run, Trevithick and his passengers decided, hey, we earned a drink. So they parked the carriage and went into a local pub in Cornwall to celebrate. The problem? They left the boiler's fire burning unattended. So while they were inside having a pint, the water boiled off, the engine overheated, and the entire carriage, along with the shed it was parked in, literally burned to the ground. An entirely self-destructed prototype, all for a celebratory beer. Moving right along to part 2. London's steam bus boom, the golden age of commercial steam. Despite those explosive early hiccups, engineers just kept iterating right into the 1830s, and this specific era was largely championed by a visionary named Walter Hancock. He boldly imagined a future where steam wasn't just a quirky novelty, but the actual backbone of scheduled public transportation. Hancock wasn't messing around. He rapidly advanced his commercial fleet. In 1831, his model, called the Infant, carried 10 passengers at up to 12 miles per hour. By 1833, his Enterprise model bumped that capacity up to 14. But by 1836, his Automaton was an absolute beast of its era. It could seat 22 passengers and hit top speeds of 21 miles per hour. I mean, that is astonishing for the 1830s, completely blowing past the speeds of the horse-drawn carriages of the day. And this was definitely not just some theoretical proof of concept. Over the course of his operations, Hancock's steam omnibus fleet carried over 12,000 paying passengers. His vehicles traversed more than 4,200 miles on the roads of London. We're talking about a thriving, highly reliable public transit system operating decades before the gasoline car was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. In fact, if you take a bus or train to work today, you really have Walter Hancock to thank for the very concept. His services represented the absolute dawn of the modern commute. He established set, daily scheduled routes, like a popular one from London Wall to Paddington, and he charged a flat fare of exactly 1 shilling. Everyday people would literally wait at a stop, climb aboard a steam-powered bus, and head to work. It was reliable, fast, and entirely mechanical. Which brings us to part 3, Victorian engineering marvels refining the steam carriage. Now, you might be wondering, how on earth did they make this work on terrible 19th century roads? Well, Victorian innovators had to systematically tackle some massive engineering problems. Roads back then were, frankly, awful. Just cobblestones, deep ruts, huge potholes. A heavy metal steam engine shaking itself to pieces was a very real, very expensive problem. But they engineered some brilliant solutions. In 1869, Robert William Thomson, up in Edinburgh, introduced thick, solid rubber tires to steam vehicles, which added essential grip and shock absorption. By 1873, over in France, Amédée Bollée equipped his steam buses with independent four-wheel suspension, allowing them to just glide over uneven terrain. They even enclosed the passenger cabins to protect riders from the weather and the steam itself, and they introduced diagonal chassis bracing to stop the entire vehicle from twisting and warping every time they hit a 6-inch pothole. Obviously, they also had to engineer for safety. One of the biggest fears the public had was sitting on top of a giant boiler that might randomly explode like a bomb. Walter Hancock actually solved this early on, in 1827, with his patented sheet flue boiler. Instead of using a single massive tank, his design used flat, thin metal chambers. So if the pressure ever got too high, a chamber would simply split open, harmlessly venting the steam, rather than violently detonating. It was a massive leap forward, improving both heat efficiency and passenger safety in one go. And thanks to all these brilliant refinements, performance just absolutely skyrocketed. By 1873, Amédée Bollé's highly advanced steam bus, aptly named L'Obédiente, or the Obedient One, was effortlessly carrying 12 people at a staggering 60 kilometers per hour. That's about 37 miles per hour, an unthinkable speed on public roads at the time, and they were doing it safely and smoothly. Okay, part 4, roadblocks and heavy tolls, the crash of steam. So if steam cars were this fast, this safe, and clearly this popular, why aren't we driving them today? Well, here's the tragedy of it. Steam didn't die simply because it was bad technology. It was actually killed by a fatal combination of unfair legislation and some pretty frustrating daily inconveniences. The biggest villain in this story was absolutely the law. A parliamentary select committee in 1831 exposed just how brutally biased the turnpike tolls were against steam. To put this in perspective, on the Liverpool and Prescott Road, a standard horse-drawn stagecoach would be charged 4 shillings to pass. A steam carriage on that exact same road was charged £2 and 8 shillings. That is literally 12 times the cost. The people who owned the roads, the powerful horse syndicates, and the emerging railways actively lobbied to crush steam cars with these oppressive taxes. It made commercial steam services entirely uneconomic overnight. But to be totally fair, it wasn't just the unfair tolls. Owning a personal steam vehicle came with some really frustrating daily realities. Imagine walking out to your car in the morning to go to work and having to wait 45 minutes for the fire to warm up the boiler before you could even drive. Plus, because they had to use local hard water, the boilers suffered severe scaling from minerals, requiring constant, really difficult cleaning. You had to make frequent stops to replenish massive tanks of water and coke fuel. And despite all those suspension improvements we talked about, driving a heavy steam car over cobblestones still produced deafening vibrations. At the end of the day, it was just too finicky and labor-intensive for the average person. Finally, part 5, the internal combustion takeover. Gas wins the race. Right as steam was struggling against those crushing tolls and the high maintenance, a new, compact, and highly convenient technology swooped in to solve the exact problems that steam engines had created. In 1876, Nicolas Otto patented the 4-stroke internal combustion engine. It was light, it was powerful, and crucially, it didn't require a massive boiler. By the 1910s, gas-powered cars were absolutely dominating the roads, outcompeting both steam and early electric vehicles. But what is truly tragic here is that steam engineers didn't actually stop trying. By 1923, Abner Double perfected the Double steam car. It featured an automated burner that could start from cold just with the turn of a key in only 40 seconds. They solved the absolute biggest problem steam had. But by 1923, it was simply too late. The gas engine had already won the war. So the crucial point here is understanding exactly what killed the steam car's absolute last chance. Early gas cars really had one major flaw. You had to hand crank the engine to start it. It was physically exhausting and, frankly, super dangerous if the crank kicked back and broke your arm. Because of this, steam and electric cars still had a tiny edge in convenience for a while. But the invention of the electric starter for gas cars eliminated that dangerous hand cranking entirely. Gas cars became instantly, effortlessly easy to start. And that delivered the fatal blow to both steam and early electric vehicles. Gas was officially king. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it?
If those early innovators like Walter Hancock hadn't been intentionally stalled by heavy tolls, completely unfair laws, and the powerful horse lobby, where would steam technology have gone? If they had the money and the freedom to keep iterating, would they have solved that cold start problem 50 years earlier? It is such a provocative alternate reality to consider. We might literally be driving incredibly silent, lightning-fast steam cars today. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this journey through the forgotten era of boiling water and steam has completely shifted how you view the history of the automobile. See you next time.